academic life here at CRCDS, and it is my joy to welcome you to the J.C. Wynn lectures this afternoon. Dr. J.C. Wynn, he served this institution for 26 years. He was a professor of practical theology and the director of the graduate study program in family ministries. Dr. Wynn believed that family was actually a legitimate mission field. And so he sought to train people, ordained and lay, for this special mission field. One of his gifts to the church and to the larger community is that he put together a pastoral care program in counseling. And there are many graduates still in this region that are serving as counselors because of the work of Dr. Wynn. He served as a consultant to the World Council of Churches as well as the Vatican on their Commission for Inter-Christian Marriage. He was honorably retired from the Presbyterian Church USA as clergy, and he served as the chair of Commission on Family Ministries for the National Council of Churches. Upon his retirement in 1985, his family asked if we might be able to put together a lectureship honoring his life and his work in our midst. And so with their generosity, we were able to put together this lectureship, and it began for the first time in 1990, and every spring there is a J.C. Wynn lecture. And so we honor Dr. Wynn, who has now gone home to his great reward and final retirement in paradise. And we celebrate his ministry in our midst this day with our lectureship. I want to invite you, as you share this lectureship, to be aware of the social media opportunities. If you tweet, you could tweet. If you Facebook, you could Facebook. If you want to know more about our speaker, here's her website. So all of that's here for your assistance so that you can connect to the greater world and let everybody know what you're up to this day. I want to remind you, as one of the hosts of this afternoon, that the restrooms are out there and that there's water up on the upper level where you registered, as well as wonderful tables of information about some of the local programs that support and encourage our folks in their the second half of life to live it more fully, and for those of us who want to be encouragement and support to know what resources are available in the larger Rochester area. One of the great innovations, we were patting ourselves on the back earlier today of lecture week, as we have begun to work on our fall and spring lecture program here at CRCDS, is that we have student ambassadors. And our own CRCDS students have the opportunity to accompany and assist our speakers. And one of those student ambassadors is Judy Zeman, and she's enlisted her son as well. And Judy is going to introduce Amy for you today.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, we can try that one more time. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
No, it's that time that you guys are all exhausted, and there should be coffee running amok through your system right now to keep yourself awake. But I have no doubt that you will be kept wide awake by the amount of ministry and teaching that we are going to have here today with Dr. Amy Hanson. My name is Judy Zanin, and I am thrilled and honored to have been asked to be a student ambassador. And yes, I'm sorry to hold, we actually got name tags. I know. I feel very official with this. And plus now people can know who I am, which is also very much a blessing. I am in my second year here at Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School. I am going for my Master's of Divinity and eventually to be an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. And I cannot tell you how much it's been in this very brief time with Dr. Hanson that I feel like she is just a kindred spirit and a wonderful soul, and I think that God definitely brought us together on this journey. It's sad that in just a couple hours I'll be hopping her on a plane to say goodbye, but I'm sure we'll keep in contact. Just to say a few words about her. She wanted me to be brief, but I'm not going to. Yes, right? I know. Dr. Savay said, no, don't be brief. So I won't. I'm going to read this whole thing. Amy has a bachelor's degree in Bible and Family Ministry from Manhattan Christian College, a master's degree in gerontology from Abilene Christian University, and a Ph.D. in human sciences from the University of Nebraska. She teaches several aging courses at the college level and has conducted research on volunteerism among older adults in the church. Amy has a passion to help older adults discover a life of Christ-centered meaning and purpose. She speaks throughout the United States to pastors, healthcare professionals, and older adults on the unique needs and opportunities of a great America. And at the age of 23, Amy became the full-time active adult minister at Central Christian Church in Las Vegas, where for 5 years she led a ministry of over 300 adults, 50 and over. Quite the accomplishment. Amy's experience also includes working with the Christian Continuing Care and Retirement community, as well as serving on the Speakers Bureau for the Alzheimer's Association. And for my own personal note, I definitely thank you for that, because I've had many of my family members that have been subject to that horrible disease, so thank you for that. She has written a number of articles on older adult ministry for Leadership Network, Rev, and Christian Standard, and she's the author of the book Baby Boomers and Beyond, Tapping the Ministry Talents and Passions of Adults Over 50. Amy and her husband John live in Council Bluffs, Iowa with their 3 children, Ella, Eli, and Elise. When I was asked to serve as student ambassador, as my tag, so nicely plays, for Amy, I was given her book to read. And the other day, I was reading it, trying to finish it up quick, right? Because that's what we all do as seminary students, we read as fast as we can. And and I was actually texting with my sister at that time because my mother is celebrating her 70th birthday this weekend. We're trying to plan what to do from afar to celebrate that birthday. And I texted her a picture of the cover, and I told her how much I was really enjoying this book. I texted her this exact message. It's great. It's good for mom and for her generation to understand themselves better. It's a good book for us, too, for their kids, so we can understand them better, too. It's also a guide for us to learn how to manage our own lives as well. It's way more than the title states. Plus, it's on Kindle and Amazon Prime Audio, so how can you go wrong? And I really believe that. Amy is able to touch on all of our needs. And even through her book, even though it's titled Baby Boomers and Beyond, she succeeds in way more than just baby boomers. It's definitely the beyond. And in meeting and spending time with her these last few preciously short hours, I can guarantee that she will touch your heart and rejuvenate your minds in just an instant of her time. And without any further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Amy Hanson.
All right. Well, before 1947, there were many pilots who tried to fly just as fast as they could at the greatest speed that they could to break through something known as the sound barrier. You're right. And it's October 14th, 1947, that Chuck Yeager was the one credited with actually doing this, breaking the sound barrier. And he did something rather revolutionary at the time. He, up until that point, pilots would get to this place where, everything would start to shake and, go crazy or whatever. I'm not a pilot. And people would sometimes, pilots would then kind of back away, or, what they would try would then cause them injury. Some lost their lives in the process, but it was Chuck Yeager who did something very revolutionary, much different than anyone else had ever done. When it got to that place where things started to shake and feel out of control, instead of pulling back, he pressed down on the thrust lever, going at an even greater speed, pushing through that, and really changed flying for all of us. And he described it, getting to that other side, he described it as being awesome and serene. You know, he makes lying an experience for everybody since that time. And I think the experience of aging and even ministry, when we think about ministry with people as they age, is a little bit like that, especially today, in our society today, because it's all changing. And people are, you know, approaching those years, 60, 70, 80, and it feels kind of bumpy and shaky, and how is this supposed to look, and how am I going to live this now? And even those of us who are trying to do this, either in a local church setting or in the community, people in our government and all kinds of nonprofit industries are like, woo, what are we going to do now? How do we do this? This feels bumpy, it feels shaky, it feels much different than it ever has before. And it can be approached in different ways. Some are out there saying, you know, we've got a crisis on our hands. The financial, you know, ramifications of having so many people moving into the second half of life is a crisis of, you know, astronomical proportions. And so there's discussions happening around that. And there's others who are experiencing it personally and want to deny it, right? They're like, I'm not getting old, I'm not telling you my age. And some people get old and they get bitter and cranky and think they've earned that right. So there's all these different approaches. I think there's a better one. I think there's one that kind of pushes through some of those bumps and challenges and gets to a place of seeing, wow, this is a season, a stage of opportunity, of blessing, of an untapped kind of potential and resource that we have not even scratched the surface on. And this really has been what I've dedicated my ministry. It's been my calling, if you will, my whole career, my whole adult life. You know, I volunteered in a geriatric hospital as a candy striper. Remember that term? I don't use that term anymore. But, you know, I volunteered, and so one day after school, every week, I would go spend time in this geriatric hospital, which was much like a nursing home back then in my little hometown, and I'd be delivering water to the residents. And then as time went on, and I went to a Christian college, I knew I wanted to work kind of in ministry or in serving people in some way, but this pull was on me. And it was so common, you know, to encourage, this is 20 years ago now, people like myself to go into children's ministry or youth ministry, because here I am 19 or 20 years old myself. And when I started talking about this thing at the time that was called senior adults, they would look at me like, you know, what? Who are you kidding? I mean, you know what? But I just had this kind of call and stuff. I'm going through the doors and looking for internships, and would a church take me to do this? And pursue that educationally, and I'm just as excited, if not more so now, as I was then, because I think this is where it's at. Don't tell all of the other areas of ministry I said that, but I do. I mean, this is like cutting edge, pioneering kind of stuff where the rubber meets the road. And I'm so glad that you said you're going to spend part of your afternoon here today, because hopefully you'll leave here that much more educated than the general public. And hopefully with a little bit of fire in you, not only for what you do in ministry as a leader, but just in your own lives and how you interact with people and how you think about your own aging. Never before in history have so many people lived for so long with so much health and vitality and capacity to give. And I think God is up to something. I don't think it's by accident that He's ordained this for this moment in history. And I don't want to miss what He's up to. I don't think you miss it either. So what we're going to look at in the short time I have with you really are 5 of kind of the foundational things, practically speaking, if you will, when we think about ministry or programs, service that we want to provide or think about when we consider working with and through and beside people that are in the second half of life. And this has really been gleaned. I had an opportunity several years ago to get to do a lot of interviews with churches across the country that have innovative ministries or programs for older adults, and kind of tried to combine that with what I know from the research and put that together in the most practical way possible. So these are 5 pretty basic but foundational things. The first one that is just paramount, sounds so simple, but is so critical, is we have to recognize the diversity of the whole older adult population. So when I'm at like a family reunion or something, and someone says to me, what do you do? And I say, well, I kind of work in the whole landscape of older adult ministry. And then they say to me, well, you know, I used to visit a nursing home once, Amy. And I always feel like it's so telling of the kind of small view that many of us have of what it means to interact with or minister with or, you know, come alongside those in the second half of life. One of the research principles in gerontology is that we become more heterogeneous as we age, right? So we become more and more diverse as people the older we get. If I had a room full of preschoolers in here and they had their backs to you, developmentally they'd basically be doing the same thing. That's with my kids, right? Or your grandkids. Much more advanced. But as we get older and we continue to age and add years to our life, our lives become much more diverse in terms of what we've experienced. Health has a huge factor on that. Some people have never left kind of the community they grew up in. Some people live all over the world, and there's just a great amount of diversity. So when we think about an aging population, to think that we can just figure out one thing and we'll have them figured out is not going to work or be the case. And this plays out in many ways. One of those is in how we consider the way we define age. Chronological age is the number that our birth certificate says that we are, and there are all kinds of programs built around this. Social Security was founded around chronological age. You can get the cheaper cup of coffee at McDonald's or Denny's or wherever, but a cheaper movie ticket because of chronological age. You know, I'm from Omaha, actually live in Council Bluffs, but it's right there by Omaha, Nebraska, where Warren Buffett is. You ever heard of him? Yeah. Right, okay, so his home is Omaha. Give me a break, but he can go to McDonald's and get a cheap cup of coffee, and I can't, right? But that's because of his chronological age. They don't care how much money he has. I mean, it's the number. Functional age is how we function. It's that biological age. I think this is a much better way to define age, if you will. You know people who are 65, 70, 50, and their bodies have been ravaged by cancer or diabetes or health, and they just seem older, right? And then you've got, 90, 95-year-olds who are running, half marathons and doing all kinds of stuff like that. That's that functional age. So it's not always fair to use a chronological number. It's how somebody functions. Now, psychological age is how old somebody feels, right? And you've got some people who will be telling me at 50, oh, it's just the pits to get old, Amy. Don't do it, that's a sidebar that I could preach a whole sermon about, literally. I mean, seriously, if we are followers of Christ and we believe that God's ordained, each season of life, why do we get to a place where we think, well, this is a terrible season? I mean, we all have good seasons. I mean, I don't want to go back to prom wondering if I was going to have a date. Everything has a good and bad. Anyway, you get the gist. Psychological age is how somebody feels. And research would say most people in the later years, until we get to the very frail health years, the later years, feel about the same way they felt in middle age. They just look in the mirror and they're like, I don't look the same, but I feel the same. Social age is how society defines us by the roles that we play. So I'll give you an example of this to make a little more sense. I find out somebody's going to be a grandparent for the first time. And I say, oh, that's so exciting. How do you feel about becoming a grandma? And she says, well, I'm excited, but this must mean I'm getting old. So the social role of grandparenting is equated with aging. Or, I heard you're going to be retiring in June. How do you feel about that? Well, we're looking forward to it, but man, that must mean I'm getting old if I retire. So see, the social role is kind of playing out that person's quote-unquote age, when really somebody can become a grandparent for the first time at 40. They can become a grandparent at 80. I mean, there's a lot of variation in that. So I think it's important you kind of hold this into your head. It's not just an easy thing of saying, well, this is what it means to be old, 65, 60. It's not just a number. Practically speaking, when you think about about the people in your lives, in your churches, your faith communities, there's probably 3 groups that fall within the older adult kind of umbrella. Now, I am not suggesting that you go back and tell your pastors and ministers to like use this in Sunday bulletin to describe it. Please, this is for our learning purposes. Right? There is a frail, elderly group of people. And this has huge, huge ramifications in terms of social issues, ways for us to serve. Health is playing a big part in their lives. Their declining health. So these may be people who are homebound. They can't drive on their own anymore. They need somebody to take them to doctor's appointments, get them to church. They're concerned about end-of-life issues. They're grappling with questions: does my life have any purpose or meaning anymore at all? Why has God kept me here this long? Those can be some of the difficult questions they may be wrestling with. The Bible instructs us to care for the orphans and the widows, and I think some of their biggest needs are for visitation and for something to help combat loneliness and helping them know their life is still purposeful at this season. I heard of one church who, I thought this was so innovative, but so simple too. They do a Sunday school class, and that could be in any video, any kind of Christian education type class thing, group, that was done via conference call. So the teacher was there in the little room on Sunday morning or whenever, and all these folks that were a member of that church had the number to call in at 9:30 or whatever, because they couldn't get out anymore, and they celebrated birthdays that way, and they shared prayer requests that way, and had a little lesson that way, and were connected even though their frailty kept them from physically being there. I think there's lots of creative things that we can consider under that umbrella. But this is just a portion of that older adult population. If we were going to put a chronological age to it, we'd probably say 85 plus. You can't put a for sure number around it. That's what you would attach to it. If you took a snapshot today of how many people were in like a long-term care setting, you would just see 5% people over the age of 65. Now that's a little misleading because most statistics would say that all of us at some point, not all of us, 40% of us would spend some point in a nursing home type setting. Maybe we're being rehabilitated from a broken hip or something like that. But it should alert us that, hey, there's a lot of folks who are not in a long-term care setting that are out there in our communities. So this is one of those pieces. The second group I'm calling the senior adult. These are definitely like 70 plus in age. They are retired in many cases, the majority of cases, not always. There's not specific boxes for this. They are maybe slowing down in some regards, especially those who are on the little bit older end, the 78, 79 plus age end. I kind of like to describe it as, they don't mind driving at all. Their preference, though, would be to not drive at night. Sometimes that would be people in this category. They are also wrestling with issues of purpose and meaning. Wanting to know, where do I fit in now? They may be feeling a little marginalized in their church. They maybe don't have quite the energy to do everything they used to do, but they do have some things still to give. In many cases, they've lost their own parents by this point. That's kind of that senior group. Then there's this generation that I call the new old. Again, I'll put this in your bulletin on something. New old are primarily baby boomers. So about age 50, or I'm going to say 55, to 70-ish, 70, 69. They are a totally different generation. They are approaching aging in a totally different way. These are people who are caring for their own aging parents in many cases. They're wrestling with issues relating to their adult children. They have grandkids that they're often involved with. They may be retired. They may be thinking about retirement. They may be wanting to be like part-time employed. They also are wrestling with purpose and meaning in their life. There's a lot happening in this cohort, if you will. And this is why it's so important that we don't stop and think, well, you know, we're going to put together some older adult program at our church, and it's just going to take care of all three of these groups. Because we've got a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of different stuff going on among these three sort of groups, if you will. To unpack that a little more, I want us to look at some generational characteristics here. So the frail elderly and the senior adult, the ones I just had on there, we're going to put that all together and say that they're a part of the builder generation. That term is used kind of to describe that these are folks who came home from the war and built our country. Tom Brokaw described them as the greatest generation. So born before 1946 or so, before 1945, you split them up into the GI generation, which are our oldest ones, who are dying off at a very rapid rate. And then the ones a little bit younger, but still in this age group, called the silent generation. Anybody think of any famous ones? Just to encourage you to say it. The Beatles? Yeah, they might be in that. We're going to talk about the Beatles when we get to the baby. So famous people who are builders. Billy Graham is a builder. Jimmy Carter is a builder generation person. Who'd you say? George Patton, probably, yeah. Seems like that, right?
And was here too.
But less a year or two?
A lot of it and was here today.
Oh, yeah. Should I have all of you? If you're a builder, then you can hand up that. And you're famous, no doubt, that you're here today. I just thought of, like Johnny Carson, if he was still alive, would be a part of the builder generation. Now, what forms or what shapes some of the characteristics of generations are historical things that happen. And so for the builders, it was things that happened like in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. What were some of the big things that happened in history during that time frame?
Great Depression.
Okay, so we had the Great Depression,
Dust
the wars, the Dust Bowl, World War II, Prohibition,
CCC camps. Airplanes.
CCC camps.
CCC camps, concentration.
Oh, concentration camps as a part of the war. Yes.
And
And then New Deal. Yeah. Suffrage movement, So you can get your wheels turning with that. You've mentioned mostly the Depression, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Those would be some of the big ones that really shaped a lot of these folks. With the history, then, we can kind of see some characteristics. Now, I do not like to silo people and say, okay, if you were born during this time, then this describes you. However, having a little bit of this helps us. It helps us kind of understand the perspective that people have and where they're coming from. So the builder generation tend to be hard workers. They came home from the war, they built our country, they believe in a work ethic that says, we work hard, we can accomplish this, we can get this, we can acquire this. They also tended to be savers and really frugal. They lived through the Depression, they knew what it was like to not have anything, and they kind of were taught that way. I grew up in Oklahoma, and my grandma, she's been gone for 20 years now, but she was alive during the Dust Bowl, and she experienced that kind of stuff. She grew up on a cotton farm, poor. Her mom died when she was young. Her dad was not a nice man. So this was kind of her background. She marries my grandpa. By the time my mom comes along, who's the fourth in the line of kids, and they were fine. And financially were fine. Certainly by the time we came along, the grandkids. But we make the 1 hour drive, on a Sunday afternoon to see them. And she would serve us grandkids. No lie. She would serve us our juice out of washed out Vienna sausage cans. Do you remember Vienna sausages?
Sure.
Yeah, she'd wash those out, peel the paper off, use fingernail polish to write our names on them. Annie, and then pour their apple juice or whatever in there. And I bet, we don't have time, but many of you could tell stories like that about yourself or about your parents and the things they saved. That's because of what they came from historically. That's why. She had walked through that. So you save stuff. You might need it, you could use it. This group tends to be patriotic. patriotic. You know, if I'm in a service or something, and I say, hey, I like all the veterans to stand up, there is a pride among this generation. You know, they remember, some of the women, I mean, just about lost all of them, but, you know, they remember what it was like to not have a right to vote. You know, they had walked through some of those changes. This group's loyal. They are loyal to their country, loyal to their job. This generation, a little bit with the boomers, but they worked for one company or one place their whole life, took the gold watch home and they retired. That's way different today. They're loyal to their church and their church denomination, which is a radical change from today. You know, people would stick with the church no matter how bad that preacher was or how good he was and she was, you know, and it was because that was their church. We don't see that same kind of loyalty today. They tend to be private. You don't hear them talking about going to see a therapist. You know, they're going to deal with their stuff, you know, sweep it under the rug. We can handle this in our home, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Cautious, you know, about American-made cars. They were respectful. They called people Mr. and Mrs. And they were dependable. Their word was their honor. They said they were going to do it. They did it. Those are some of the things that kind of describe this group. And it's a part then of how they are as they age. You know, it's in their bones, if you will. Now, the generation just after them, who are a part of this kind of second half group that are 50-ish plus, 55 to 70 or so, are the baby boomers. And in many cases, the baby boomers were the children of the builders. So boomers are usually defined as being born between 1946 to 1964. So that puts our oldest boomer this year at 70, right? Famous baby boomers, besides some of you in this room.
Bill Clinton.
Yep, Bill
Donald
Clinton,
Trump.
Hillary Clinton. Yeah, see, Trump is 70 this year, I think. They fall in this category. I think of Oprah Winfrey is a boomer. She'd be on a little bit more later into that generation. Some of the actors you think of, like Kevin Costner, is a baby boomer. Reggie Jackson here is a baby boomer. Those are boomers. Now, what happened historically in the 50s, the 60s, and 70s? All right, so we got the Vietnam War, civil rights, assassinations of like JFK, Martin Luther King Jr., and yep, Robert Kennedy.
Gloria Steinem.
Gloria Steinem, the whole feminist movement. Yep. Watergate.
The moon.
Sexual revolution.
Walking on the moon, you're right. Sexual revolution. I feel like it's boomers in rooms, you know? Yeah, and there was a lot that happened. You know, the hippies and all the picketing and the rioting about things like the Vietnam War and stuff like that. Bomb shelters, yeah. You know, media became a part of things. You know, we had television. Woodstock, yes. Stonewall. Yeah. And then music changed a lot. Rock music, you know, was a big change among this generational group. You mentioned Man on the Moon, Civil Rights Movement, JFK's, I think. You mentioned all these. Good job, students. All right, so some of the characteristics then that go with this group would be they were the most educated group up until this point in terms of the fact that it became much more common for women to get to go to college also. So we had men and women getting college degrees and beginning to have more women in the workforce. Certainly had women during the wars that worked. There was a change in how that played out on the boomer generation. Media-oriented. You know, this was the first generation where it was like most homes had a television. And that changed everything. We started seeing that stuff on TV. The boomers were independent in nature. So that while the builders were very loyal, the boomers were like, well, I got a college degree, I don't have to do it like that. They were willing to question things, right? Kind of goes with the questioning authority. I'll throw that one in too. You know, they were questioning the government. They questioned their employer. They were willing to question their parents. And they didn't just take things as face value. They are cause-oriented. You know, they were the ones who started things like MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. The PTA, Parent Teacher Associations at school, got much more popular underneath the boomer generation. This group has become more fitness conscious. We didn't have things like Lifetime Fitness in the require fitness to boomers gain. And a variety of reasons for this. Some of this is because we now have more sedentary jobs. But also the baby boomers, as they age, dramatically want to stay young. I mean, it's just a huge characteristic of this group. So they're wanting to know, how can I do that? Interestingly, if we dive into this, their health status, those who are more gerontology, that look at the health aspect of aging, are concerned because there's still lots of health issues, obesity, as the boomers age, what going to mean? So just because we've got more fitness opportunities doesn't mean they're all healthy and taking advantage of those. Rock music fans, now their music was radically different than their parents, right? So we got this term, the generation gap. Because, here they are listening to the Beatles, Elvis, and there's this world coming to what their parents said. And then I mentioned that they were going to question authority. Now, there's no reason why we shouldn't think that some of this that makes up who they are will not be traveling with them into how they approach the later years of life. This is why much of what I do is, just practical working with churches, helping them kind of rethink their ministry with older adults, because as boomers age, they are not automatically just folding in to the existing seniors group that had a potluck luncheon once a month and a bus trip to see the fall foliage, because they're a different generation. And in terms of how they're approaching aging, they want different things, and they may need different programs. They may not fold into what's already existing for senior adults. It's interesting, the Senior Center, or the Area Agency on Aging, which is a federal program that has these agencies throughout all their states. There in Nebraska, they asked me to come and do some talking with their staff because they're being affected by this in that area. There's all these senior centers, which I'm sure are here and everywhere else, that have really done a great job reaching the builder generation, but the boomers aren't responding to it. And it's funny, there's discussions back now, are we going to have to call these things boomer cafes instead of senior centers? Or, it's just a lot of talk regarding the change, because one of the things we know is they don't like the word senior. I don't know if you've come across this at all, or you can recognize it in yourself, but this is a national conversation. The boomers are not responding to that term. They don't identify themselves as that. Even if they turn 65, they don't see themselves as a senior. So we may have to use different language in order to best reach them. They are attentive to their health. Again, that comes from that desire to stay young. They are technologically savvy. So the myth that as someone gets older, they're not as into technology, not the case with boomers. For a while, boomers were the #1 users of Facebook. That number just changed again. But they're doing their banking online, they're doing their shopping online, so they're pretty technologically savvy, and they're looking at retirement a little differently. Research would show that many of them are retiring from their corporate job maybe that they've had, and then saying, I want to do something different now, maybe part-time. I'm going to own my own bed and breakfast, or I want to go back and be retrained and do something more for the civic good, or for a nonprofit entity. And there's lots of discussion about that. So the new older are approaching aging in a different way. Now, I know that was a fire hose, and we're just on that, and I knew I was going to spend a lot of time on that one point. The diversity of aging is really important that we grapple with. Because we're never gonna have success, and I'm speaking to you as leaders. We're never gonna have success saying to someone, come on, you're 68. It's time for you to be in this class. You're promoted. I mean, let's get with it. You should start liking taking trips, or you should start liking barbershop quartets because you're 68. I mean, you know what I mean. You know what I mean with this, right? It's not like that. This is a generational group. If we want to be effective at reaching the most of them, we have to recognize kind of the diversity within this whole dynamic. We should not neglect those who are the builder generation, but we've got to recognize what we've got kind of coming here on the class. All right. The rest of these foundational points of the second one here really fit with the boomer but they also are of importance to that builder or senior and frail elderly generation. So churches that are doing a good job, and even among programs that are happening, they are creating ministries that help people age well. It goes with that idea that people are wanting to stay young, a holistic approach to aging. Several years ago, the MacArthur Foundation did a study, a big study on what it meant to age well, to age successfully. Because up until then, gerontology research had been very focused on the problems and the ailments of aging. And that's kind of the field of gerontology. And then someone, there began to be people that were like, let's look at this from a little different angle. What does it mean to age successfully? And they teased apart, with all their research, 3 main pillars. That people who aged well maintained good physical health. They avoided disease and disability, right? So they exercised, they ate right, they got their regular checks on their mammogram and their colon and all that kind of stuff. All those things that contribute to physical health. People aged well if they were able to maintain some cognitive function so they could maintain some independence. So that mental function piece. And then the third thing I think is very interesting, those who really age successfully stayed engaged with life. So in some way, shape, or form, when they did the research, it could have been something as insignificant as that they had a reason to get up in the morning because their neighbor was counting on them to water their plants while the neighbor was on vacation. But it gave them purpose. So they were engaged in relationships, and they were engaged in something that they considered productive. And that contributed to them aging well. Interesting with the mental piece, the memory functioning piece, baby boomers report their number one fear being Alzheimer's disease. More so than cancer or heart disease, their number one fear is Alzheimer's disease. They've seen it. They've seen it in a family member, they've seen it in friends, and they want to know, is there anything we can do about this? That's for another lecture, but no. The research is still out that there is not a cure. No one has zeroed in and said this is the exact cause of it. There's lots of money and research being done in this area, but there aren't any for sure guarantees. However, keeping our minds active and sharp seems to be a good thing in many areas. So that's of interest to baby boomers. And I think that can be interesting to us even as we think about reaching out to people. 2 of the primary ways to keep our minds active are by learning new things. So making new connections in the brain, causing those dendrites to fire and all that stuff. And that could be traveling somewhere new, learning a foreign language, musical arts things, dancing. It's all going to be really good for the mind. And then they're finding that creativity is a key piece to this mental aging well. And that it seems to be that the right and the left hemisphere of the brain are linking up even better as we age. Like that's a plus with aging, is the fact that these 2 hemispheres of our brain, do a little more connecting with one another, and then we have the capacity to be more creative as we get older. I got to hear, he's passed away now, Dr. Gene Cohen, kind of one of the main scholars in this area. He was with the National Institute on Aging in Washington, D.C. for many years. And he was talking about this, his research on this. And he said his in-laws came to visit him in Washington, D.C. And they were in their 70s, and he and his wife both had to work or whatever. And they were like, no problem, we can navigate the subway system or, whatever, transit. Well, so they're inside in like the Smithsonian or something, with no windows all day. And they come out in the evening, and there's been like a major snowstorm, like whiteout. So navigating this transportation like they thought wasn't going to be so easy. But he gets his wife, and they get a little ways down, and then he gets to an intersection, and he spots this Domino's pizza parlor across the street. And he gets his wife on his arm, and they go across the snow-packed street, and they go in. He says, I'd like to order a large pepperoni pizza. I want it delivered to this address, and I want you to take us with you. That is creativity. Creativity on its finest. And seriously, Dr. Cohen was telling a story. He said we are more apt to think of something like that and do it as we get older. Because one thing is our mental capacity thinks that way, and two, we have much more of an attitude of, if not now, then when? I will try it, it might work. In seriousness, creativity is more than just painting and, music. It's anything we bring into being, that's going to be of some value to somebody else. Creating a new recipe. I have to be creative getting shoes on kids in the morning so that we get out the door on time. Creativity can continue to be built into our life, and there seems to be a lot of good that comes from that. Those three pillars, it's interesting too. There have been a lot of scholars in the academic world who say we really need a fourth pillar because one other component to aging well is spirituality. And there is lots of more and more research that shows that those people who practice their faith and have an active faith do age better. But I really believe that our faith is not its own column out there. It really encompasses all these things. It encompasses our physical health. It encompasses our minds. Where God talks about renewing the mind. It encompasses our purpose and our passions. He's a part of all of that. And this all can kind of fit into ways that we minister and we respond to people in a holistic kind of way. So, ministries that help people age well, I think are going to be something that have to continue to be considered as we move into the future and reach this generation. A third foundational thing is just making spiritual growth or spiritual formation among older adults. Now, historically, when senior adult ministry, if you will, came on the scene 30 plus years ago now, it was a very fellowship or social-based model. It was to help these people who were lonely and maybe had lost a spouse or weren't working anymore have something to do, right? Provide a forum for them to be able to socialize with others and have activities. And it was good. There's been a lot of good that's come from that. But as often happens, the pendulum swung pretty far this way, and we began to neglect some of this deeper spiritual formation stuff, and also then the fourth point I'm going to mention, the component of engaging them in serving and giving their lifestyle to people. It got pretty focused on, let's just kind of entertain them. So we've got to be swinging that back. And places that are effective have started to make this a priority. Now, whatever term you want to use, whether that be evangelism or outreach or those kind of outside the walls of a community, it's something important to consider because not everybody who's over 60 or 65 is a Christian or has a faith. And this really comes from some myths, I think. One of these, Dr. Erwin Palmer was a scholar out of Duke University, one of the foundational people that did aging stuff years ago. He put together, it's probably 25 years old now, a facts on aging quiz that really became kind of a hallmark in those of us in this area. It was used in all kinds of research, medical professionals, clergy, and all kinds of people, to kind of help them see, what do we really know about aging? And two of those items are these. One of them was this: adults become more religious as they age. True or false? It's a tough one, kind of, isn't it? Research would say that this is a false statement. We do not automatically turn 65 or 70 or 75 and ding, now I'm interested in religious things. I never have been before, but because of my age, I am. That's why that's a false statement. Our number, the numerical age, doesn't just make us that way. Having said that, the builder generation, remember the builders were the oldest ones we looked at? It was much more common and kind of expected, even socially, that you practice a faith or were part of church. So that is one of their characteristics. The second thing is there's a lot of things happening in people's lives as they age that can make them receptive to spirituality or religious things. But just age itself doesn't mean that. Then this other one, older adults can't change. Some of you were in chapel and I mentioned that this morning. That's also a false statement, even though we all know some old people that can't change, right? We kind of feel like, she's so stuck in her ways, we'll never get her to go along with that. Change is more about our temperament than it is our age. So if change was hard for someone when they were younger, it may be hard for them as they get older. And one other thing to remember with this, when lots of things are changing around us, which is the case that comes with aging, there's all kinds of loss that starts to occur. Losses in physical health, losses just in people and relationships, losses because job is changing, that's a loss, even though it can be a blessing, something we're looking forward to. When we have a lot of that going on, we are apt to hold on to things and say, you know, I'm not going to let this change. That's what we've seen happening in churches in many cases. When we feel like someone older is the one that's, you know, just digging their heels in, if we could step back and say, hey, what's going on in their life? There's a lot changing around them. So it feels like they're kind of putting the stake on, you know, the carpet of church when and saying that can't change. But really, it's all the stuff that's occurring in our life that's going to make it right now. But we are all capable of changing because that's what God does. He remakes us and reminds us. It's a business of changing. So we've got to kind of keep that in mind and keep it fresh with us that, hey, there isn't a point where somebody reaches some certain age and then, you know, there's kind of no hope of them. For many years, it was thrown around, you know, statistics that would say, you know, we've got to reach people with the gospel message by the time they're 18 or whatever, because if we don't, you know, they'll never listen to it or hear it. And so we've thrown lots of staff and money at things like children's ministry, youth ministry, which are valuable, and I'm thankful for it. But I don't think this is a either or, right? Why can't it be a both and? If we were to invest time and strategy and money into reaching out to people that were a part of the older generation, I think we see great purpose of people growing in their faith, coming back to God, knowing Him, finding Him in a real way. One other thing I want to mention with this is, I kind of touched on it, is with the things happening in their lives, this tends to be a receptive generation. Even though their chronological age doesn't automatically turn them on to that, there's a lot occurring. They're receptive. I'm sure many of you have seen that social readjustment scale or the stress test, you know, the sociology kind of thing a number of years ago that were put out by Dr. Holmes and Dr. Ray. And it's kind of this list of things where people could kind of rate how many of those happened to you within the last year, and then you'd score it up and you'd kind of say how stressed you were. And they used it with professional athletes at first to kind of figure out how likely were they to be injured based on how much stress was happening in their life. Well, number one on that list is death of spouse. It's the highest score. But then as you keep looking through it, there are things like retirement, change in residence, change in vacations, change in living arrangements. There are a lot of things on that list that commonly occur among people who are older. And when we go through changes and stresses, we're more open and a little more receptive to matters of faith. Dr. Harold Koenig, he's at Duke University, and he's done a lot of study in this area and also in aging and health. He says this: in order for God to become the object of a person's ultimate concern, as is what happens in religious conversion, the possession, the person, the goal that served that purpose beforehand must be displaced. This displacement often occurs through loss, right? That makes sense, doesn't it? And so a lot of losses that occur in the second half of life can kind of open up that receptivity in somebody. So whereas we might have bought into the myth, they can't change, in reality, they're really in a place to be kind of open and sensitive to now a deeper spiritual experience. A second reason they're receptive is they're looking for meaningful relationships. Looking for meaningful relationships. We all are, but I don't know how many older adults I've talked to and things that I've read and seen in research. People tend to kind of drop the pretense as they get older. You know, they're comfortable in their own skin. This is who I am, and I want to just have some real relationships with folks. It can be hard because our social world starts to shrink as losses occur, as people move away, and yet it's vital and it's important. And then a third thing that makes them receptive is they're looking for a life purpose. Does my life count? Does it matter? My identity was tied up in my job. You know, we introduce ourselves like, well, what do you do? I'm an accountant. I'm a teacher. And now they're like, well, I was a accountant. I was a teacher. What's my abiding purpose than a relationship with God and what He gives us as our purpose and things to do outside of our sphere that we're in. All those things make somebody receptive. Now, this is just a story. This is a guy, this is a church in the Illinois area, Chicago area. It is inside a 55-plus living community. And they are really finding people who are coming back to God. Okay, many of these people have been exposed to this, but they kind of left it. And now they're finding their way back to God. And this is just one example. This man is 80 years old. Over time, this takes time. He's like invited by a friend. He plays golf with them. Kind of in a small group, they start to have discussions about the Bible. He decides he wants to be baptized. And that's what's happening here. And he tells the pastor, all my life I've known something was missing. Now I know that it is. And, we should have more stories like that, I think, where we see people that are kind of having that awakening in their second half. Just two quick practical things with this that we're finding. We're going to have to go to where they are, especially as we start to think about the boomer generation. Just having a building does not attract people like it used to. Sorry. We got to be where they're at, especially among those boomers. So if they're at the fitness center, we want to get our people that are a part of church to understand, hey, when I'm out there, I'm on a mission, if you will. I'm wanting to be a friend, and I'm wanting to come alongside them if they're going through a health issue or a health problem, so that I can show them the love of Christ. That will help them begin to find the way back to God. So we got to go where they are. And in this other one, wow, I think this is going to be huge. Because older adults are looking for purpose, no matter if they are people of faith or not, they are going to be looking for those ways to make an impact with their life. And if we can invite them along on projects and things we are doing and let them rub shoulders with us, I think that's going to create an interest. There's a church in the Villages, Florida, who was taking kind of some people from their church to go and work on an inner city mission project, building some stuff in New Orleans. So in the Villages, you know what that is? Does somebody know what that is? Oh my goodness. I was down there doing some work with this church. It's like 80,000 homes of like people over 55 on like leisure steroids. I mean, it is just like, wow. I mean, anyway. So this guy's talking about to his neighbor about this trip they're going to take to New Orleans, and the neighbor who's unchurched, he says, well, that sounds interesting. I could cook for you guys. That week, I could come along, he loved to cook. I can cook while you all work all day, and you come back. So they took him along. So all week long, he's there, he's rubbing shoulders with these people, he's cooking. He kind of where this is going. I mean, now he's made friends, and he comes back, and he starts attending that church, and he really does find his way back to God as a result of that experience. And I hear things like that. It can be big like that, on a scale like that. It can be small, just like saying, hey, I volunteer at the hospital. Do you want to come volunteer too? And as they volunteer, they're beginning to make those relationships. So, it's important. It's important that we let that spiritual growth piece still be key in people's lives. And then the other one, that I said, so important that we swing this pendulum back, goes with that desire to find purpose, is emphasizing serving in people's lives. We know that's important to aging well, that they feel like they're doing something productive. We know it's important in terms of just generally health and well-being. And for many, that's part of their faith backbone, that they make a difference and they want to leave some kind of legacy. And so how do we go about mobilizing people? One of the things that we've got to be doing is challenging people to rethink retirement. Retirement definitely has an image in our culture, and it's got people kind of confused, because we sort of think by the TV ads and stuff that we're supposed to just see this as a time to relax and focus on ourselves. And yet we're not sure if that's going to be completely satisfying. And it's interesting, historically, retirement hasn't always been a part of the public. People, when they were tradesmen and they were farmers, they worked. That was what they wanted to do, and work as long as they could. And then even when there were factory jobs, people's desire was to work. We started having pensions and things that were created, but they didn't love that. And it wasn't word status. And you know why it happened? Savvy business professionals figured out this was a way to make money, right? And they started advertising, you can go to a baseball game in the middle of the day, and we're going to bus this group down to Florida or Arizona and let you see this kind of lifestyle that you could lead, and began to sell this idea of this is a time for you, to relax and leisure, and we bought it. And even for a while then we had this pull towards early retirement. Now I am not going to stand here and say retirement is this bad thing. I think there's some good, great stuff that comes from retirement. But the idea of living life and then having 30 years completely devoted to play and nothing else, it's not supported in the psychology or sociology literature as being a healthy, quote unquote, healthy thing. It's not supported by scripture that it's a good thing, to say, I get to live this long and then it gets to be all about me. It's not necessarily saying you got to keep working for a paycheck, but having that, now I'm going to be self-focused mindset doesn't bring about kind of the good. Now, I used to speak at things and I'd say, retirement is never mentioned in the Bible. I was wrong. It's one of the things about being a teacher, you find out you're wrong. I want to do that in a minute too, but I'm going to do this first. So I found out it was mentioned in Numbers chapter 8. And here's what's happening in Numbers. Okay, this is when these are some instructions that are being given to the Levites, to the priests. And they're being given through Moses, through God, to Moses, then he passes them on. So I'm going to read these couple of verses to you. The Lord said to Moses, this applies to the Levites, men 25 years old or more shall come to take part in the work of the tent of meeting. But at the age of 50, they must retire from their regular service and work no longer. They may assist their brothers in performing their duties of the tent of meeting, but they themselves must not do the work. Some of you were like, 50? Why am I still working? It's very interesting there. But you have to kind of look back at the history there. These were the guys, the people responsible for this very important thing, the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. They had to carry it exactly right. And if it got touched wrong, they'd die. And if this was dropped or this was moved, it was a big deal. And it did require some physical labor. And, whether we like it or not, part of aging, part of God's design, once Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, is that we are going to die. We are mortal beings. And so aging becomes part of the plan that leads us from this life to the next. That's part of the deal. Physical decline occurs. So in this case, he's saying, hey, at the age of 50, they're supposed to retire from that heavy labor, but they may assist their brothers. Other versions, biblical versions, will say they can come alongside them, or this idea of mentoring them. In science, there is recent studies being done on leaf cutter ants. Now hold on, I know you're like, where did we go from numbers to leaf cutter ants? Stick with me. So leaf cutter ants, I guess they have these sharp mandible, razor-like blade things, teeth, that cut the leaves, right? Well, eventually those dull. They do not remain sharp enough to continue cutting the leaves. And what they are discovering is when that happens, those particular ants that had been the ones to cut the leaves are then moved to a different task within the colony.
Wow.
I know! So they often then become the ones to carry the leaves. Is that not like a perfect example of, if God cares for the lilies of the field, he cares for you and I. If he's got a different purpose for ants, does he not have different purposes for us? So we may have, work in this capacity for so long, and then that may change because of physical health, because of desire, because of energy, whatever. But it's not that he doesn't have something else for us or for people in our lives to then do. There's this transition changing that's constantly happening. Now, Robert Ashley, he's a scholar in the kind of aging gerontology field, and he looks at the cycle of retirement. And I like this because, a lot of times we kind of just think, oh, somebody retired. They were working. They got their, gold watch, and now they're done. No, retirement has a whole phase. It's a whole season of life. He says people go through pre-retirement. That's when they know it's going to happen. So, in June or in September, I'm going to retire. research would show that for many people, they start to not like their job as much once they know that retirement is going to happen. It's very common, it makes sense. Do you want me to ask some of the people in here? Okay, hopefully not. And then people retire, okay? And they often fall into one of these three patterns. Some go into a honeymoon phase. Oh, I'm retired. I'm going to do everything I've ever wanted to do. I'm going on 5 cruises this year. I'm babysitting my grandkids every single day. I'm cleaning out all my cabinets, blah, 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 blah. I'm retired. Ah. This is a honeymoon. Some people fall into an immediate retirement routine. These are folks who had a pretty well-balanced life. They had a lot of other components going on besides just their job. And they kind of thought through what they wanted it to look like, and they fall into that routine. Some people go into complete rest and relaxation mode. These are often those who have had a pretty stressful career, they're tired, and they just are like, whoa, I'm doing nothing for a while. I remember a guy, I was serving on this church staff as an older adult minister, and we wanted to start a lifelong learning center where we reached out to retirees in the community, used our campus, and, classes and things. He was going to retire. He's a high school chemistry teacher. He's also a horticulturist, and I thought he could, teach some gardening classes, and I just wanted him to be my right-hand guy. So here I am in my 20s, first ministry, and I go to him and I ask him if he'll do this, and he says, no way. I'm just sitting in my chair reading books. And I'm like, devastated, right? I go back to my office like in tears. Oh, I'm going to leave ministry if I can't even get this guy to help me out. But you know what? After about a year or two, he came back and he was one of the best volunteers. He did help lead that ministry. We were able to reach a lot of retirees in the Las Vegas community through it. But he needed that break. He needed to be able to rest. Dr. Robert Butler, who's a big scholar in aging, talks about why don't we give people a sabbatical? This idea of a sabbatical after retirement for like a year or 6 months or whatever, to kind of regroup and rethink. There's not something wrong with that. What I think becomes wrong, if I can be so bold, is to say I'm going to go for 30 years and do nothing for the rest of my life. That becomes selfish, right? But taking just that sabbatical to regroup, I think would be very good. Some people fall into disenchantment. Not everyone. This can be when the spouses were going to retire together and travel, and one of them gets cancer, and they have to become caregiver. Or an aging parent needs so much care. Or retirement wasn't what they thought, and they're not enjoying it like we thought they would. Reorientation is kind of what could happen after that sabbatical period, where people say, okay, I've honeymooned, I've rested, I need to kind of take stock now and say, what do I want my life to be about with these remaining years? Where do I want to spend myself? And then people fall into some kind of comfortable retirement routine. What's termination of retirement? Death? Could be. Going back to work, right? Actually describes it as when frailty of health, when health becomes the primary concern in someone's life, they're not really living that retirement lifestyle, if you will. If I visit the 97-year-old in the nursing home and I say, Myrtle, how's retired life treating you? She says, honey, I'm just old, I'm not even tired. It is a season. It is a phase. So getting people to think about retirement, kind of challenging their thought on it, is important to getting them involved in serving. It's also important that we be thinking about different opportunities. Now, this is really key in serving and volunteering. To go back to that builder and boomer generation, the builder generation, the senior adults, and some of you who have been in churches and church leaders will get this. They have been willing to fill an existing need. You need me there on Tuesdays at 10 a.m., I'll be there. I'll serve on that committee, that missions committee, or that whatever committee from now until I die. I mean, that was that loyalty among the builder generation. They would make a long-term commitment, and they were there. Boomers are not responding that way. They're not. They like short-term commitments, and they want flexibility. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Well, I'd like to teach that class. I'd like to volunteer in that way, but we like to go up and see my granddaughter play volleyball, and I want to have a little freedom to do that, so I don't know if I can commit. Oh, this is a hallmark characteristic of the boomers as they age. And we cannot fight against that, I don't think. I mean, it is a matter of discipleship, so kind of challenging that selfish mindset. But I also think we have to come alongside and say, how do we utilize all the time, experience, talents among that generation and do it in a way that will kind of fit with their lifestyle? So I'll have pastors ask me, we really like this guy to be an elder, we'd like this woman to be a leader, an elder, and they're for 6 months out of the year, and they're in Florida. So we'll say, let's experiment with using conference call or FaceTime or Skype so they can still invest as a leader even though they can't be there all the time. Co-teachers, co-leaders, so that they can share the responsibility. I'm going to be gone seeing my grandkids, I'll take over. I'm going to be gone. That's the kind of stuff we're going to have to start building in. And we're going to have to let go, even though some of you are going to want to throw something at me. This idea of like, we need you to serve on our committee from now until December of 2019. It's not going to happen. I'm very interested in watching what happens with organizations like the Kiwanis or the Lions Club or the Rotary. Because those were service organizations that people kind of just signed on to forever, and younger generations are not responding to that. Boomers and those younger are looking at causes that they believe in. That's that entrepreneurial spirit and things wanting to have a mission. They'll say, I'll help with that project to Honduras. I'll help with that thing you're doing for the Special Olympics, but I don't want to just be on this ongoing forever committee. And we'll have to make adjustments to react and respond to that. Okay, I'm going to keep moving because I want to give you some time for some questions. But I just got a lot to tell you. The third thing here with this mobilizing older adults, after we help them think about retirement and we kind of relook at what we think it means, it's just helping them. Some people don't know. They don't know where they want to serve. They haven't found that place yet. And there's just some practical things we can do to help people, keeping them connected to God. He's the one who gives people their passions and their places to serve, so praying for them. This is a story of a guy named Hal. He was 78 when I met him. He's from Houston, Texas. And he was volunteering in the Houston prison system, and he had started about 20 years prior, so in his late 50s. And I said, well, how'd you get involved doing this? And he said, well, I was at church, and my pastor was preaching from Matthew chapter 25. When I was sick, he visited me. When I was in prison, he visited me. And he said, it resonated with something in my soul. So I got trained to start working with these men in the prison system. He went on, he told me more about that. Being who I am and what I do, I kind of start playing the other side, and I'm like, how? You're pushing 80. How am I going to do this? And he about jumped out of his seat. He's like, Amy, there's a crying need in our nation. He started rattling off statistics, and he was like, there's a 92-year-old guy in a wheelchair who comes to the prison every week to work with those guys. If he can do it, I can do it. And he had found his spot at that second half mark in his life. And it happened because he was connected to God. He was listening to him. He was listening to what Scripture said. Found his spot. Some people just need to be encouraged to serve where they've always had an interest. This lady here was 80 years old, always wanted to go on some kind of short-term mission trip. Her church was going to go to Nicaragua, and she signed up. And thank goodness, because I would have gone on. I would have not. Thank goodness there weren't people at that church. Well, she's too old. We need to be worrying about her. They took her along, and she complained the least about the heat and about the cots they had to sleep in. It was a blessing to those people that lived there. And it happened because it was just something she wanted to do, and she never had the chance to do it yet. Helping people tap into what their passion is, what that thing is that stirs them, that keeps them up at night. I love this definition. Passion is the God-given desire that compels us to make a difference in a particular area. So we have gifts and talents. So maybe I have some gifts of teaching or public speaking. Passion tells me where to use it. I could use it for kids or children's ministry or whatever. But my passion is older adults and older adult ministry. So that's what passion is. It's helping people find that place that just stirs in them. Like, I've got to do something about this. What makes their eyes kind of light up? We cannot be all about just plugging people into slots. We've got to be about something that is they are passionate about, that resonates with them. Show them how to use their past experiences. Research shows that boomer men, especially boomer men, want to know, how can I use my skills, my work experience now in an area of service or volunteer. And they don't know how to do that. You know, it breaks my heart when I heard a guy say, you know, I'm getting ready to retire and I'd really like to help my church, but I want to do more than be an usher. And you know, sometimes I go to churches and I'll say, what do your older adults do? And they'll say, well, we've got a group that comes in and folds the bulletins on Thursday morning. And we have some ladies who make coffee. And I'm like, that's all great. We all should pitch in and do that. And for some people, that's their niche. But that is a small, just barely scratches the surface of the things that people in the second half of life can contribute. These are people who have taught, like companies, and all kinds of stuff that can be utilized. This is my dad. He was an accountant. He retired early. He said one of the things he wanted to do was help with Habitat for Humanity. So he thought that would mean swinging a hammer, right? Well, they found out all his financial experience in their local chapter needed a financial director. So he basically, as a volunteer, spends about 8 hours a work day a week, you know, doing all the financial stuff for Habitat. That's using skills and experience. And then the last suggestion I have is help people use their hobbies. We are not saying you got to throw out all the great things about the retirement years. People sometimes just need to be able to see how those things can merge. You know, there's all kinds of things out there where people who like to travel and have an RV can go places and help with like camps for underprivileged kids, or help with painting projects, or building, or a variety of things that can be important. The last fifth thing I'll just quickly say to you is older adults need to be integrated into the life of the entire church. We are not about siloing people and saying, you know, okay, you've now reached 60 and you belong over here. Healthy, vibrant churches integrate generations across the lines. And some of the best ways that can happen is through generations serving alongside one another, praying for one another, all those kinds of opportunities to help the generations link up so that faith is being passed on and being encouraged. All right. I'll give this one last story, and I'll have you guys ask any questions they have. One church I heard of. Those are those things I mentioned to you about intergenerational ways to connect, serving together, intergenerational events that can be fun. I know one church who does an annual miniature golf tournament where they match up their younger people with their older adults. But this one church, they put photos of their young people on a wall, and when they're senior adults, I try not to use the word senior, but these were senior adults that gathered, they encourage them to choose a photo of like this high schooler or junior higher and say that they were going to be praying for them. So Peggy picks up this photo of this young girl named Sarah, and goes home and calls her and says, I'm going to be praying for you. And Sarah says, well, this is great because my mom was just diagnosed with breast cancer. Here's this high schooler with a mom that's got breast cancer diagnosis, and she's got this woman in her church praying. Time goes on, Sarah goes off to college, she meets a guy, she comes home to go shopping for a wedding dress. And who does she take with her? Her prayer partner, Peggy. And when the wedding happened, it was clear across the country, Peggy and her husband fly there, you know, to go be a part of the wedding. All because this older adult committed to saying, I'm going to pray for this young person. And something as simple as that creates kind of that bond and that relationship. In Psalm chapter 71, David prays a prayer there where he says, even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, O God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your might to all who are to come. You know, we talk about bucket lists. And what do you want to do before you die? Well, I'm going to go see this, or I'm going to bungee jump, or whatever, skydive out of a plane. But talk about an amazing bucket list. David is saying in this prayer, don't forsake me. Don't let me die, God, until I get to declare who you are to the next generation.
Amen.
You know, what greater thing could someone be desiring than that, to pass on faith to the next generation? So, five kind of tenets there. If you guys have a question or two or comment, I kind of want to close an illustration
Well,
for
first,
you. I know, I kind of you like a fire hose, but I wanted to get it to you. Yes?
Speaking as somebody who's very proud to be from the millennial generation, and
baby boomers like to characterize us all the time as being lazy and selfish. And first of all, we're always like, well, who raised us? Come on. But I appreciate so much the fact that you're talking about intergenerational ministry, because I feel like young people get segregated out in church too, and they don't meet the people in their church who could serve as mentors or partners with them. And I think that's so important, because young people fall away from the church all the time. And we're famously becoming the nun generation, and we need to know somebody cares if we show up on Sunday morning. So thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it.
She is still speaking something so important. Fuller Institute in California did some research on, why do kids that are even a part of church or a part of a youth group then go to college and kind of fall away from faith. And one of the things they discovered was that those students who had relationships with adults in their church, that didn't just go through the door and kind of go to their youth program and leave again, those who had real relationships with older or adults were more apt to have a faith that stuck. They call it sticky faith. That's what they call it, sticky faith. Because they had those relationships. And often they say like a spirit influence, at least 5. People that might go to their baseball game or might, just be in their life and know their name. It is so important, and it goes both ways. Older adults have to kind of take the risk of inviting, hey, could I take you out to lunch today? And young adults need to be willing to say, would you like to go out to lunch today? Because we're both timid to do it, but it's so important. Faith stories that get passed down in relationship, and it's in just the telling. And a younger generation needs to hear what it was like to experience infertility, or what it was like when finances were tight, or what it was like when you moved and you had to leave all your family behind, and where was God in the midst of that. And that's told just through relational stories. So, absolutely, and millennials will report in their research about millennials, they want those relationships. Older people can be scared of them, but that's not founded in anything. So, she's right on, yeah.
I help churches design older adult ministries and then implement them. But one of the things that I've noticed in much of the literature is a suburban bias. It's not necessarily a rural or an urban or a very rural poverty. Can you speak to what your findings are in that area?
Okay, so she's saying as they kind of look at churches and older adult ministry, a suburban bias, meaning that it's more effective kind of to have
No, that it's educated retirement. That isn't even an issue when we're talking about poverty.
Right.
The idea that I can retire.
Right.
So how are ministries, have you seen differences in ministries where churches are not suburban, highly educated people who retirement's a big issue for them? How do we reach out to the boomers who are impoverished?
Right, impoverished, still working, blue collar,
right, and trying to make ends meet, and healthcare needs is not being figured into their poverty.
Yeah. You are probably right. There is a bias in the literature, especially the religious literature. The way you put that is exactly right, because I pretty much have read a lot of it, and you are right. That is heavy in that way. You kind of like point that so well. But here with the boomer generation especially, we're going to see many of them continuing to work, even those that aren't what we would call at a poverty level, but just life in general. The fact that we're living longer and the recession thing happened, people are working longer. And I think some of it I've seen is an identification just with them as a generation. Some of them like to just occasionally have something fun that helps them grapple with feel like, oh, that's who I am. That was music that I liked. Those are friends that are part of my peer group. And we can't have the same expectations that, all 5 days a week we're going to be able to volunteer somewhere. But providing some opportunities for them to connect with their peers, whether that be social or fun, and then helping them think about, how to invest their time. And there is a change in time. Even if they're still working, there's a difference if they're not raising kids anymore. There is more discretionary time with kids at home. So, good point. Yeah?
Do you think we're getting away from sitting 5 as we've done here? Is
good. I know Bismarck decided to do that back 150 years ago,
Yep.
and all those officers were going to die anyway.
Yep.
But,
So he said, are we gonna get away from 65 as that number for the retirement year? And really, you know where that came from? He's right. That came from Germany when we were starting the Social Security Act. We took it from them. And life expectancy, in 1900, life expectancy was 47. Today, life expectancy is 78 and climbing. So we're not, choosing this arbitrary age of 65 really isn't in line with what's happening. It's just hard, when things are put in.
Security is all right for being higher?
Do I think so? This is an opinion question, right? What?
That's the question. and about Social
He
Security.
said, do I think so, or Social Security move up and be higher?
65.
It's already doing that.
Yeah, it's already doing that. I mean, it's already doing that. If you're born after 1960, you have to be 70 to receive full benefits, right, or something like that. 67, and that's continuing to go up. I think that will have to happen some. Because our health and our longevity is increasing, how do we rethink that? I mean, should we really just be able to live leisure life for 30 or 40 years? It'll just, anything that gets embedded in the culture takes a long time to change. So that number 65, it'll take a long time to change that mindset. But it's re-envisioning kind of new models, really, saying, hey, let's look at this differently. Yeah.
Thank you. First off, you refer to my returns. Thank you.
Okay.
Secondly, and I do have a question on the back end, but secondly, in your list of things from the 60s, you forgot GPS.
Cheap gas, he wanted me to mention things from the 60s.
30, 32,
Yeah.
Question, and I was going to bring up the success, because that's what it is. That's roughly it is. I'm 7, so I'm the top of the list here. In Canada, England, China, and several other countries, 60 is the formal retirement and when you start getting the privileges. So how does it differ than we are? I mean, in what the framework work you put in there, because those people are just as active as we are.
Right. Right, and they have a different kind of socialist, or not, so
Is it just-
structure.
Are you saying that it's just the culture, the way we have to continue to do certain things?
Continue working?
Yeah. I mean,
He's just
all the
mentioning
time-
some of the other countries that 60 is their number. And I'm not really versed of some of the global, nuances of that. I'm not gonna exactly answer that, but I will say this, Laura Carstensen, she's at Stanford, and she's kind of looking at this longevity stuff and saying, hey, how should we look at this differently? And she's the one that talks about creating kind of new models. And, one of the things that she's advocating for is, the period of life from once we start work, let's say 25, after school, to 65 or 60 or whatever, is so intense. That's the season of life when we're also raising children, we're financially burdened trying to take care of all the bills. Everything, every stress, not every stress, but is a highly stressful time. And she's saying, what if we reinvented kind of how that looks? And we spread out, we work longer, but we let this part be a little bit more relaxed in here, where people don't feel so burdened to make all their money, we stretch out that time. Now, I don't know how that plays out in some of these countries. I don't know when they're retiring at 60, because they do still have longevity. But work is a good thing. Research would say work is actually a good thing for us.
The reason I ask is that because those people that I know, those countries I know that from their friends, they think we're crazy.
For continuing to work a long
Yeah.
time?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to get yours.
One of the things that I think is really going to change how people look at aging and when they retire is that the older, or the builders, for the most part, they lived in a world when they were loyal to a company, and part of the reason they were loyal to a company is the company would give them a pension.
Yes.
And the switch between pensions and putting money into a 401k if you can or if you want to, or depending on what the match is, I think it's going to make a really big difference. Is there any literature on that, or people looking at it?
Oh, I don't know. She was just asking the difference between the builder generation who had pensions You know, and so they were loyal to a company because they were gonna get that, and now we don't have that nearly as much. You know, you're putting it into your own thing. And I don't know. I do think people are much more on their own today than they ever were, and they're working longer in some regard because of that, right, retirement financial income that's not there. Because you're right on, we don't have that with companies like you used to. Yes?
I wonder if you're familiar at all with the co-housing movement? We're actually working to start a co-housing community here, really multi-generational. And I think that way of living really helps address a lot of the issues and challenges that you raise for people who are older.
Yeah, she was mentioning the co-housing movement where that's a multi-generational kind of households, right?
Yes.
And then there's this caring one for the other, relationships that are established. And I just see a little bit of that. But I do think that's a lot good to explore. Yes, ma'am.
What about supporting boomers who are raising grandchildren and boomers who have no retirement are feeling financially strapped
Yep.
and stressed?
Yep.
How do we, I mean, a lot of the things that you gave us are for those boomers who are able to
Right,
be
those
more
are good
flexible.
questions.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but
Mhm. Now, those are real needs. There's a lot of boomers that are raising grandkids, you're right. Hopefully, you're going to hear a little bit about that tomorrow with your scholar here. It's going to be here tomorrow. And many boomers are working longer. But they're still generationally kind of that same generation. They're still wrestling with how do I make a difference with my life. So I think, you know, we need more programs that come along and support people that are raising their grandkids or that have a very heavy role with their grandkids, even if it's just babysitting every day, 8 to 5. Because that's that's happening a lot. And empowering those boomers to understand this is a place where you're getting to leave your legacy. This is a place where you're getting to serve. This is a place where you're getting to pass on your faith, is with your grandkids. So let's not miss this opportunity or this chance. And I know boomers that are wanting financial help now at this stage, financial planning, and because they are having to continue to work. And I think that's the diversity piece. When we go back to how do we serve these generations, it's going to be a variety of things depending on the context of the community, the DNA of that particular church. If a lot of those boomers are working, then I think it looks different. It does look different. And it comes alongside what their needs are. By far, their life is stressful. It's not like it's not, just because, yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, you mentioned diversity throughout, and I like the question that was asked in reference to poverty. I was thinking she was one direction I was going in. In terms of racial and ethnic differences, I was a little concerned about that. And I don't know if the literature is biased, because that's what I was kind of feeling that it was biased. I know that as researchers, we tend to select out. I tend to select a certain population for a particular reason, but I let the audience know why I had selected that particular population. But if we're saying baby boomers more tech savvy, you know, I know that there's some people that are certainly not what I fit. So I was wondering how do we qualify that, you know, in our presentations to make it clear? Because when I'm listening, it seems as if I'm listening to white middle class.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what you're saying, but it needs to be clear to me.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hear what she's saying.
Yeah.
And I think she's right. I think some of you have picked up on that, and a good word to me too, because I think you're right. A lot of the research, even as they've been looking at boomers, has probably been skewed that direction. You know, it's not even, you know, as I think about it, so much me. I mean, it is probably me picking that out, but the research has been skewed that way because it's looking at retirement really, and not factoring in the many that aren't or can't or haven't. So point well taken. And very true, you know, I'll say this too from the generational standpoint. I've been hearing some great examples from churches and programs that are using the technology piece where the older adults are not tech savvy, whether that be boomers or the builders, and are using that as a generational bridge where their young adults are like offering a genius bar, you know how that's called that, the apples are at church, or on an afternoon, and any older adult or boomer can come in with their iPad or whatever, and they've got a young adult who's going to interact with them and help them figure out how to use it, and it creates a little bit of a generational bond then. So, all right, one more.
I'd just like to add to that list of diversity or of groups that sometimes get left out. And those are the people who, the assumption, even among those of us who are older, that people with disabilities can't do a lot of things instead of what can folks do. And I've really experienced that in the last 7 years since I became disabled. And it's really amazing. And I think the church has a role in helping groups, and since your focus is on the older folks, that to begin to be sensitive to that. The other area or the other group that often is not or doesn't feel included are groups of people who have never been married, who do not have grandchildren, who may not have any family left at all. I'm talking about blood family now. And I just think that the assumption always is in the general society that everyone has family and that everyone has
Someone.
they have someone or they have grandchildren, and I just think that the church has been very remiss in that area.
Yeah, she just made a good point about all those who are single, which are going to be true among older adults as well, that don't have grandchildren, don't have family, and that really is where the church, I think, has a mandate to step up and be that. And then she mentioned disabled or disabilities, or I'll kind of go back into that frailty piece. We're going to have to get creative in that area. I think of a church in California. The woman was homebound and older, and she had a lot of health problems. She calls the church one morning. They know her. Hi, Mary, how are you doing? And she says, not well today. And that's why I'm calling, because I'd like the list of all the other homebound members so that I can begin calling each of them and praying for them over the phone. Now, see, she had figured out in her disability, in her what looked like an inability, how to have a very meaningful, impactful ministry. And we need to help empower people to figure that out and do that. You guys have been great. I'm going to give you one quick closing story, and then we've got a couple of business things here to do. The missionary David Livingstone, you know his name, he opened up the gospel to Africa. He loved those people. It says that as he was dying of malaria, he asked to be propped up on his knees to keep praying for those people that were there. When he died, he had his body had to be buried in Great Britain. That's where he was from. And it had to be buried there. But the African people lovingly, ceremoniously removed his heart, buried his heart under one of the native African trees, carried his body to the ship. His body is buried at Westminster Abbey, but his heart is in Africa. And I think that is much of what we want to have people wrestle with, really regardless of socioeconomic status, race. As they age, where do they want to leave their heart? There's nothing wrong with work, there's nothing wrong with golf, there's nothing wrong with whatever. But we want to help people kind of deep down wrestle and say, where do I want to leave my heart? Where do I want to make sure I'm investing that's going to make a legacy that lasts? If I can be of a resource to you, occasionally I send an email newsletter, really occasionally, but we put a sign-up sheet out on the table where you came in and registered. Thanks for being here today. Please.
Dr. Hanson, we are so grateful. Thank you for helping us to think through this even more. It's been such an energizing day, and we are just delighted for your presence, your spirit, and the wealth of knowledge that you shared with us. Thank you again. A couple of announcements. First of all, Dr. Hanson's book is available for sale out in the area where you registered, so I would encourage you to go out there. It's a wonderful work, so please buy generously. And Dr. Hanson has also generously volunteered to sign as well. So So she'll be there out there signing the books as well, so we encourage you on that. In front of you, when you, or it should be in front of you, when you walked in, you've got a great evaluation form. If you can take just a moment to fill that out, and again, just leave that at your seats. We'll be by to pick those up afterward, but please do take the time to share your thoughts with us. It helps us to continue quality programming for you. We invite you to join us this evening for the LGBT Christian Experience film tonight down at the cinema, Jen Silent. And parking for the cinema, those of you who are not aware, is across the street. You can access that parking lot either from Goodman Street or from South Clinton. And then just walk across Goodman to the theater. Doors open at 6:30, film begins at 7. They are opening up the concessions for us, so bring your spending money to have some popcorn and some goodies when you take a very important film. Then tomorrow morning, we invite you to come back for our African American Legacy Chapel service, where CRCDS alumna Carol Garrett Reverend Carol Garrett will be preaching at chapel at 10:30 upstairs in the chapel. And then at 1:30, we will have the African American Experience lecture by Dr. Dorothy Smith, who is here right here among Smith Ruiz. I knew I would do that incorrectly. I'm so apologetic. I should know better. I have a two-word last name, so my apologies to you. But 1:30 tomorrow, and that's back here in this room. Okay, so we invite you to come back and continue this very important conversation, some of the themes of which we've already touched on today. Two final things. We have our Save the Date card that is out there on the Colgate-Rochester Crozier display table. I encourage you to take those. If you're on the mailing list, you'll receive those automatically in June, but it's never too early to start planning for the fall. We have our fall lecture series on religion and politics. And by then, who knows where we'll be. I didn't think we'd be here. But, so I don't know where October's going to lead us, but I can guarantee you it will be interesting. So please take one of those cards, put that in your calendar. And then also, almost a year from now, we will be taking another trip, journey to Israel-Palestine. And that's in the May-June timeframe of 2017. We have information, again, out on the Colgate-Rochester Crozier table, and we encourage you to, even if you just have a passing interest right now, why not plant the seed, put some water on it, grab a brochure, and think about it. There are also some people who have been on that trip who will be delighted to speak with you about how wonderful it has been. Again, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to Dr. Hanson, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow